Hi, I'm Chuck Fletcher. You're listening to Snow the Goalie.
Oh, yes. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in to Snow the Goalie, the only Flyers podcast, the People's Podcast, Players Podcast, Prognosticators Podcast. And we've said it before, but we'll say it again, the Presidential Podcast, because today, for the second time in the history of this podcast, we are joined by the sitting team president of the Philadelphia Flyers. And in this case, it's a man we've been looking forward to talking to for a long time. And we know it's a person that the fans have wanted to hear from for quite some time as well. And that is Flyers president and GM, Chuck Fletcher. Thank you so much for joining us here today on the show.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, Chuck. I've been looking forward to having this conversation with you for a while. And the reason I think this is perfect timing for it is, in a lot of ways, to me, and tell me if you feel the same way, this seems like, even though this is technically your third offseason with the Flyers, this really seems like, to me, your first real one. In a sense that you came in mid-season the first time, you were just kind of still assessing what you had. You made some nice, perimeter moves. And then last year you had the pandemic, but this year is kind of like the first one where you're like, okay, I've been here. The team's been here. I got my fingerprints on this thing, and now we're moving forward. Does it kind of feel that way for you as well?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair way of putting it. And we're looking at everything we've had. As you mentioned, I've been here for 3 seasons or parts of 3 seasons, and inherited a lot of people, a lot of staff, and a lot of good staff, I might add. But I've had a chance to work with them now for parts of those 3 seasons, and we're starting to make some adjustments off the ice and starting to fine tune some things we want to do there, and work on certain areas of the off ice operation, and then of course now you transition into the hockey part, and the flat cap and the pandemic have made things a little bit different, maybe a little bit more interesting in the sense that the cap isn't moving. I'm not sure when it's going to get moving, so you have to be a little bit more creative. But certainly, we need to find a way to get better. We took a step back last year. It wasn't acceptable. I believe we're a better team than how we played, but yet our record's our record. It is what it is, and we have to decide what part of that season was a result of a pandemic or things that could change and will change, and how much of it's just we got to get better. So those are the decisions we're going through now, and the conversations we're having, and we'll look to do what we can. We'll look to make changes, and we'll see what happens here over the next 2 or 3 weeks initially, and then even into next season as teams continue, I think, to tinker with their lineup. So there'll be opportunities this summer and into next year, and but obviously we'd like to make some improvements and have a better team going into next year.
I think things are going to come pretty fast and furious here. I mean, everything is kind of really condensed together. First the expansion draft, and then the draft, and then the entry draft, and then free agency. I guess to start with the expansion draft, Chuck, how long in advance do you really start to look at something like that? I mean, it's such a unique experience in hockey. It only happens once every so often. I mean, obviously we've had it twice in 4 years now, but how long in advance do you really start looking at that and start saying, well, maybe we put this guy, maybe we don't, kind of thing? And then when does it really start to come together where you think you pretty much have your finalized list?
Well, I think we looked at it on a very cursory level. As soon as we heard about Seattle coming in and the potential rules, you're always looking to see what issues you may have, or what areas, where you may have to look into. But seriously, probably coming out of the pandemic in Toronto, or sorry, out of the bubble in Toronto, at the end of the playoffs 2 seasons ago, and going into that off season, first of all, you have to make sure you have a goalie to expose. You need to have at least one, and that you have certain players that meet the requirements that can be exposed, and that you don't have any major protection issues. So we really started digging into it in the off season last year, and continue to monitor it over the season. So I would say most teams would probably do it that way. I mean, I remember last off season, once a lot of the signings had already happened, we looked at every team in the league and what potential issues they may have with expansion, to see if there's teams that may be looking to make moves or add players, or had to get rid of somebody. So you're looking at it pretty seriously about a year out.
Chuck,
oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Russ.
So Chuck, to that end, when you start looking at this after the bubble, and now you've had a season to kind of assess, especially some of the younger players on this team, Is there a guy on this roster, and I know that you said that you've had informal conversations, not any formal notice, but is there a guy on this team who played his way onto the protected list that you might not have necessarily been as sold on a year ago about protecting?
No, I don't think so. Obviously there's a young man, Oscar Lindblom, who we are going to protect, but a year ago there was different questions and about that. So I think there's some players that you had to assess where they're going to be at from a health perspective. But in terms of playing them on and off, not really. I mean, a young kid like Joel Farabee is exempt. He's not a player that we have to protect. He's just exempt. And obviously, he had a big season this year. That type of season, uh, what that may have changed an opinion on a player had he been in that category. But no, I think it was more from a health perspective. That's the biggest thing. You want to make sure who's healthy. Did anybody have a really terrible injury that maybe changed your opinion or changed your status, or somebody that got healthy and played really well? But I think players like a player like Oscar Lindblom, obviously what he went through, seeing that he's back healthy, was able to play, I think gave us that that we feel very comfortable now, that knowing that he's going to be even better next year. He's healthy, and he's going to be a guy that can contribute to our roster here for the next couple of years for sure.
Yeah, following up on Russ's question, the one name that I thought about when we were talking about this beforehand, Chuck, and I think I thought about this name because there was some uncertainty with him at the trade deadline, is Scott Laughton, just not knowing where if he would fit, if he would be on the roster even to be a protectable player. So that's why I thought maybe you might mention his name in this way. Does that kind of fit that mold maybe?
Yeah, but with Scott, I think it would have been different because I was either going to sign him or trade him.
Okay.
And we were close to trading him. We had several teams, and I give Scott credit. As I mentioned, uh, I think he adjusted his number in a direction that made me happy. And we gave him a fifth year, which I think made him happy at his age and the way he skates. We didn't think that was a big risk, and there's always risk. But, I think with Scott, it was always going to be, he was going to be traded, and we were going to get a couple picks or whatever it was going to be, or he was going to be signed and part of our group. So, Scott's a good hockey player, and he's one of those young men that if you did trade him, my sense was if we play the way we do next year, the way I believe we're going to play next year, then and we had traded him, now we're just going to be going out and trading assets to get a guy like Scott Laughton. So, I don't know that you're ever going to quite get ahead. You just be sort of spinning your tires there. But I think he answered the question for us, thankfully, and I give him a lot of credit, and we're really happy he returned.
You had mentioned in the press conference that you pretty much have your list set. I mean, there's always something can happen between now and when it's finally due next week. But do you look at this and say that there are some tough phone calls that you're going to have with players, maybe even players who've been here for a while, and just kind of like, hey, we'll wait and see. We don't know what Seattle's going to do, but this possibility does exist.
Yeah, they're never easy conversations. I think with some of the players, there's been some communication already. I think you owe it to the players to try to be, upfront with them and explain to them why. But I think the players get it, and in particular in an era right now where the cap isn't moving, and I think everybody realizes that cap space is at a premium, even more so than it normally is. And so the players understand, and for the most part, they often don't like what they hear, but I think they do understand.
So
without
I guess
sorry, Russ, one more follow up on that. Without getting into real specifics, though, Chuck, obviously Seattle's been allowed to start talking to other teams for a little bit now. Would you say that there have been a lot of conversations with Ron Francis in Seattle at this point, or just kind of like touch and base stuff, kind of kicking tires and not really anything substantial?
Well, I've had 7, 8, 9 conversations with Ron going back a few months, and he's doing his homework, I'm doing mine, and they have a pretty good idea about our list. I mean, they have a big staff. They've been studying the same names all year on every team, so I don't think there'll be many surprises from their perspective when they get the 30 lists. Vegas is exempt. They don't have to participate. So they'll get 30 lists. And my guess is they're going to be pretty spot on with what teams are doing. And so it's just been more as they're, somebody that's, you think we're going to protect that you have interest in. Is there, there's also, they're going to draft a lot of players, and maybe there's a way of speaking to them about having them draft a player that we can then trade for. So there's different, avenues here and different conversations that have been had that I'm sure every team's had. And, it's been great. Ron's been great. He's a good poker player. He keeps things close to the vest as he should. And I think I have some ideas on the direction they're going to go, but it wouldn't surprise me if I'm completely wrong because he's been pretty good. But yeah, no, we've had a lot of conversations and tried to see if there's any way we can help them or they can help us.
So Seattle happened to hire a coach that has some pretty intimate knowledge of the personnel on this team. Have you had a conversation with Ron Francis since they hired Dave Hakstol? And if so, have you gotten the feeling that perhaps some of the conversations that you had with him about potential deals or who they may or may not be interested in changed with that hiring?
I haven't really gotten that sense. I've had a couple conversations with Ron since then, and spoke with Ron and his staff about Dave as well during their process. So, first of all, I'm really, really happy for Hack. He's a really good hockey man, and he's a great human being. So, he's got a ton of experience, and he's worked in Toronto the last few years. So I know he's really excited to get that opportunity, to get that second opportunity as an NHL head coach, and walking in with a clean slate. It's going to be exciting for him and obviously all the staff there. But it's hard to say. I don't know. Again, Ron's pretty good. He's got a pretty good poker face. Clearly, Hack would know the team well, but so does Ron Francis. He was in this conference for a while. Jason Botterill, who's been helping Ron, worked in Buffalo for a few years. Ricky Olchuk was in Carolina and Toronto, different places. So they know the Eastern Conference. These guys know our team well, and I don't know if anything would have changed with Hack going in, but certainly he could speak to the character of the players that we make available and maybe their injury history. I'm sure he would have some perspective that he could bring to the table to shed a little bit more light on our players.
Now, since Dave Hakstol has an understanding of this team and players that he may or may not have had a higher stock in, considering the fact that you've reiterated a number of times that trying to move money in a flat cap is difficult, and considering the fact that this player apparently went on a radio show abroad and said something to the extent of Philadelphia is a second home, but eventually you do have to acknowledge that things do come to an end at some point. Could you confirm that there may or may not have been conversations with a player like Jakub Voracek or his agent that, the expansion draft's coming up and there's a chance that he could be left exposed?
Oh, definitely. I've definitely had those conversations with Jake, and I had a lot of conversations with Jake during the year. And look, there's no secret. He's getting a little bit older. He's got a big cap hit, and I think any manager's not doing their job if they don't have conversations with players. And we have to look at different ways of getting better. And having said that, he tied for the team league in scoring. He's still a really good hockey player. So I can see a lot of paths where Jake would be a part of our team next year and still a valuable contributing member of our team. And certainly there could be ways where he isn't. I mean, I'm not trying to be vague. I don't know how it's going to play out with other teams or with expansion specifically as it relates to Jake, but when you make that kind of money in a flat cap era, you're going to, there's going to be conversations involving you. That's just the way it works, and he understands that, and we have a great relationship, and certainly no acrimony. There's been no ultimatums either way. It's just, Jake, we got to get better. I'm going to have to look at every way of getting better, and he gets it. He gets it. He loves Philly. I think ultimately he would like to be here, all things going well, and that very well may be the reality.
Yeah, it's in ways where he's not. I got to imagine, Chuck, that you have a bit of a flow chart, right? I mean, basing on what Seattle does and then what the next move is for the Flyers based off of that, correct?
No, absolutely. And look, we're talking to teams right now, and depending if this player isn't selected or that player isn't selected, would you trade this player for that player? All those conversations are happening league wide, and my guess is there'll be more trades after the certainty of the expansion draft. Once that's over, and you know for sure who you're going to lose, and you can't mess up your expansion list anymore once the draft is over. So it certainly gets simpler to make trades after. But I do think there's a lot of conversations going on with contingencies, and we're looking for this, and let's talk based on what Seattle does. So there's a lot of that going on, and as always, there's a lot more conversations that lead to nowhere than lead to actual moves, but it's good. It's been great. And I think, again, everybody's looking to improve. There seems to be a lot of unhappy managers this year, maybe more than normal. I'm not sure why. Maybe the frustration of the flat cap and the pandemic and the crazy year that we all went through. But a lot of people are trying to make things happen. And that's why the next 2 weeks could be interesting to see if there's more moves than there normally are.
I have a tough question here for you, Chuck, and this might be, I might be asking it slightly the wrong way, but maybe you can kind of, answer it in your own way, to make it better. Overall, when you look at where you were at the end of last season and where you want to be at the beginning of next season, do you have a number in mind of different players or different number of players that you want to have on the NHL roster? And this could include players from within the organization who are maybe graduating from, either junior or the AHL to come into the NHL. Is it somewhere in that 5 to 6 range? Is that kind of a fair number, or am I just throwing a number out there that's wrong?
Well, I guess it depends on how you count it. I mean, I think there'll have to be 3 or 4 just with players leaving, and whether a Cam York or a Wade Allison or those types of players. I'm not sure if you're counting them, if they can step up and grab it. So there's going to be some every year. I don't know that I have a firm number. We're not just going to make change for the sake of making change. And in some cases, I mean, our cap number's out there, and unless we're able to move a player to, we're going to be somewhat limited with the amount of cap space we have. We only have so much. There's only so many moves you can make with that, short of, again, creating additional cap space by moving players. So part of how aggressive we'll be dependent on what type of space we're able to free up. I mean, that's obvious. But I said it earlier today, being the biggest priority for me, and it's on everything. I mean, we were right at the bottom of the league in goals against. I mean, we were 27th, I think, in 18-19, my first year here. We were able to get all the way to 7th. And not too surprisingly, we had a much better team and a pretty good hockey team, and we were considered to be one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference. And this year we fell right to the bottom again, and we're no good. So we have to be better defensively. Now, that obviously we got to look to the outside to improve. We got to look at adding a player here and there. I get that. But look, we need some of the guys that were here to be much better. And we need to have a real good training camp where we relearn our systems and our structure. We need to take advantage of our practice time. We need to have guys focused in on puck management, positioning again. It starts up the ice with our forwards who cheated way too much last year. Some of our young D have to be better than what they were last year. And our goalies have to stop the puck way more often than they did last year. So there's got to be a lot of internal improvement. There's got to be, again, a much better training camp than what we were able to accomplish in our 8 days last year. We have to make better use of our practice time. I have to look to add a couple pieces. And if we can do all that, we surely to goodness can be much better defensively. If we do that, we'll be a competitive team again. If we don't do that, we'll be in the same position next year. I mean, we have some good players, but we can't be at the bottom of the league defensively. We just can't be. And it's the most disappointing thing I've seen, going from where we were from 7th to the bottom of the pile. I mean, it's incredible we were able to fall that far, but we did. And we got to fix it. And we're certainly going to do everything we can, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that doesn't happen again.
It's pretty clear that as an organization, we were relying on a number of young players to take that next step forward. And it's probably safe to say that not many of them did. You mentioned Joel Farabee as a guy who did. I think we can all probably agree that he probably took the biggest step of any young player on the team. But considering that it didn't exactly pan out how you wanted it to a year ago, is there now kind of more of an onus on or an urgency on the need to add a few veteran players, whether it's on the blue line or somebody else who can help to elevate some of your young forwards, rather than kind of going back and almost effectively running it back?
Yeah, well, I don't know that we can run it back because we have some holes we have to fill, but certainly we were too inexperienced on the blue line. There's no question about that. I think our fourth line was probably too inexperienced. Losing Thompson and Pitlick and some players like that had played in the league and had a little bit more experience. We gave some opportunities, and some of that was out of the cap. I mean, we just didn't have the ability to match the type of offer, say, that Pitlick got. We didn't have that kind of money. So, certainly I think we recognize that if we can have a little bit more experience in some places, that will help. Maybe have a little bit more of an identity to our fourth line. You look at a lot of the Stanley Cup winning teams, you look at the number of games our defense corps played relative to some of these teams that have won. We're a little light. After Justin Braun, we really don't have anybody that's played more than 300 games in the league, I think. Maybe Ghost. But we're light on experience. And yet, as I mentioned earlier, since 2014, the focus of the franchise has been about drafting and developing, and it's pretty tough to do a 180. So, we do have to run it back with some of these young players because this is who we are. And we need some of these young players to step up and to use the experience, perhaps the negative experience they had last year, to learn from that, to grow from that, and to come back the hockey player that they can be, for us to get better, because there's only so much you can, you look, the top teams, most of them have grown their core, through the draft and developed that core. They've supplemented things through free agency or added, made a couple key trades, no question. But you need to grow your way to a cup, and that was the philosophy that Hexie put in going back to 14. He's not wrong with that philosophy. We just have to make sure we have the right players, and that's the focus right now. And where do we have to change, and who do we have to believe in, and just be demanding and make those guys better.
Chuck, I know we only have you for a few more minutes, so I wanted to do some fun stuff with you.
That wasn't fun?
No.
I think it was fun.
Well,
Yeah,
Russ, yes, I think it was definitely
right?
fun, but I wanted to take it a step further. Let's expand our fun if we can. I remember growing up when I think I was like 12 years old. I remember saying to my dad, I was a big baseball fan. I remember saying to my dad, "How come you couldn't work in baseball?" I wanted to grow up in a baseball family. You had the luxury of kind of living out my dream in hockey, in the sense that your dad was general manager when you were very young. I think you were still in Atlanta and Calgary when you were that age, and then eventually, I guess as you got a little bit older, your dad went and took over in Toronto. I guess the first question, it's a two-part question. The first question is, what was that like for you as a young guy, young sports fan, young hockey fan, to have a dad who was a GM? And then the second part of the question is, was there ever any move that your dad made that you sat there and said, "What are you doing? What are you thinking, Dad? Why did you do that?"
The first part, it was absolutely the coolest thing ever. I mean, he was named general manager of the Atlanta Flames in '72. I was 5 years old. And so basically from my earliest memories, he's been a general manager in the league, or was, right in through the late 90s, basically. And that's how I grew up. I remember going down to the rink with them on Saturday mornings when the Atlanta Flames had a Saturday home game. I'd hang out in the dressing room. I'd bother the trainers. I'd be running around, stealing sticks, talking to the players, watching practice, the extra nets that they have in the game nets, because usually they have practice nets they put out for practice. The game nets sit in the back. I would take a stick and go shoot pucks and run around the building when it was empty. I lived down there, and I knew all the players. I knew everybody in the building. And, during game nights, when I was allowed to go, eventually I got to go to every game, but usually just weekends when I was, in elementary school or what have you. And I'd sit with my dad and David Poyle, who was his assistant GM. We had 4 seats, and they would sit in seat 1 and 2, and I'd sit in seat 3 and watch every game with them that I was allowed to go to. So I felt like I was part of the management group, and I'm sure they must have just rolled their eyes all the time. But there's no doubt that I'm in the business today um, because of my dad, because I had a lifelong apprenticeship, I guess, but certainly loved the game, grew up around the game, and never wanted to leave the game, and put my energy into trying to get in. And thankfully, Bob Clark hired me in '93 to work for the Florida Panthers, and got my break, and been fired a few times, but have been able to kind of hang on enough that here I am 28 years later. So very, very fortunate, but it was the coolest thing ever. I just remember one time in middle school, junior high, whatever we called it up in Calgary, but the Calgary Flames are going through a particularly tough stretch, and some kid made a comment, and I popped him, and then when we got in a fight, and then next thing I know, I'm in the principal's office, and the principal said, "Well, why'd you hit him in the head?" I said, "Because he said my dad sucked." So I punched him in the face. He said, "Do you think that's right?" I said, "It felt right." And so anyway, I got sent home, and I got whatever detention, whatever you do. And my dad thought it was pretty funny, but I kind of learned you have to have thick skin, and and through the years when I was manager in Minnesota, you kind of have to feel when the team's going through a tough stretch, that you're sure your kids are getting some comments or things, or if they're into social media and they're reading that. I can only imagine, for example, this year, what must have been said. I don't follow it, but
Right.
I can't imagine there's a lot of people saying how really smart I was all year. So, your kids got to live through that. And that's the tough part of it. But yeah, for the most part, it was awesome.
Do you
I don't.
still?
How
Go ahead,
old?
Russ.
How old are your kids?
My kids are in their 20s now, so they've
Okay,
grown
so
up, and they know that I'm not that smart. So they're well beyond that. They realized that a long time ago. So they probably agree with most of the criticism.
I was going to ask you then. So they were at an age, they're similar to me, I guess. So then, how much of a rock star were you at home when Suter and Parise were signed? Because I have to imagine that everybody at the time must have been over the moon, right?
Yeah, it was a crazy day. We announced the signings on July 4th in Minnesota. So it was literally, they were calling the ticket people back into the office. I think the season tickets went from about 8,000 to 14,000 within about 3 days. And it was crazy. But no, it's been fun. And my kids, my son played hockey. So, we had a lot of gatherings at our house all the time. And a lot of the kids would come by. They want to ask you hockey questions. And so that part was really fun. And certainly, again, it's always better when the team's winning and you're one of the better teams in the league as opposed to a non-playoff team. Those years, sometimes my kids' friends didn't want to hang out quite as much those years. But no, I think it's a look, it's great. It's a great business. It's been great to me. But growing up the son of a general manager, particularly pre-social media, was pretty cool.
See, now you can go out and sign those 2 guys again for the veteran minimum now, Chuck, now that they were bought out in Minnesota. You can just
Yeah,
do
I
it all
just
over
heard
again.
that. I haven't read that. I just heard that's kind of a bombshell. So
Yeah. Yeah. I guess the last thing is that, outside of hockey, you have some kind of you have some hobbies that you like to do, some things. Are you a TV watcher? Are you stream anything on like Netflix or anything like that? Is there any stuff that you're into?
no, I'm boring. I just absolutely love baseball. So I follow baseball extremely closely. I
Yeah.
watch it all. This is the way the seasons line up. The summer, you can watch baseball every night. There's no hockey on. I do love the NFL, and I got pretty close with the Vikings management, Rick Spielman, and they used to invite us out to the training camps, and we'd invite him out. So I follow the Vikings pretty closely and the NFL a bit, but I'm absolutely a massive baseball fan. But otherwise, I'm really boring. Really boring. It's a pretty all-encompassing job, but we like to travel. We like to do some things like that in the off season. But it's pretty much hockey all the time. And if not, I'm probably have a Phillies game on in the background, or watching a game on whatever channel has baseball.
I know you. I knew you were going to say Phillies, but outside of that, you got to say it because you're in Philadelphia, and that was smart of you, Chuck. I give you a lot of
Very
credit.
smart.
Give you a lot
Well
of
played.
credit. But there has to be a team that you grew up. If you're a big baseball fan, that you grew up loving as a kid. Who was it?
Well, I grew up, believe it or not, I've loved the Red Sox ever since Fred Lynn and Jim Rice were rookies, and Carly Yastrzemski was my favorite player, and so I've loved the Red Sox forever. I went to school in the Boston area, so I'm still a big Red Sox fan. But wherever I've gone, I grew up in Atlanta, so I watched the Braves, and that was back in the day, even when Hank Aaron was still playing, and Dale Murphy was one of my favorite players growing up, and I followed the Twins when I was in Minnesota, and I follow the Phillies now, and always cheer for the hometown team. But going back, if I collected baseball cards, Carly Yastrzemski, Fred Rice, Dwight Evans, Carlton Fisk, Freddie Lynn, going back then, lived through the '86 debacle, and have been able to enjoy the success they've had in recent years. So
That's awesome.
I'm not as big of a baseball fan unless the Phillies are doing well. I'll admit that, of all the things that I support. But are you finding yourself as marveled by Ohtani as it seems like the rest of the baseball world is? Like, from a very casual baseball fan perspective, what he's able to do as both a pitcher and a hitter, to me, is mind blowing. As somebody who is a massive baseball fan, are you quite as fixated and obsessed with what he's able to do, or do
yeah,
you kind of
it's
okay?
incredible, and the man can run too. I'm sure if he wasn't a pitcher, they let him steal bases all the time. But I mean, he hits massive home runs, great hand-eye, hits for average, hits for power. Then he goes out and strikes everybody out. I mean, he's an elite hitter, an elite pitcher, and again, he's an elite athlete. And it's incredible. It's incredible to, like, I'm sure there's pitchers that hit really well through college or hit really well through high school, but haven't kept up with it or have lost it. But to still be that good at both, especially with the demands of the pitching position, it's incredible. So he's fun to watch. It's great for baseball, and I mean, it's pretty cool that kids can see that and see it can be done and aspire to that too.
Well, Chuck, thank you very much for your time. We really do appreciate it. Best of luck to you in the next couple of weeks, and then obviously moving forward. And hopefully, the team will be a lot of fun in 21, 22, and we'll have a lot of good stuff to talk about. And we'll get you back on the show when things are really going well and things are moving along for the Flyers as you guys become a competitor again.
That will be better and will be more fun. I promise you that.
Awesome.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks
Sounds
again,
good.
Chuck.
Thank you so much.